Imagine you becoming the strongest hero using a spear and ends up being feared and betrayed by his best friend. And guys, let's move on to part 2 of this manhwa, which is absurd. So leave a like and subscribe, and if we continue bringing this saga, I hope you like it, and don't forget to subscribe so we can reach 100,000 subscribers and increase releases. And let's get to the content. And by calling your son a disgusting bastard, Agnes tells them to stop it and asks if the Lord has nothing else to do. But he says it's no big deal and states that he prepared a meal for them, they should rest a little, but tells us that his knights are not that weak, and he says they rested more than enough on the way, and he asks them if anyone there wants to rest, and they all say no, and so Agnos tells them to go quickly, but the cute cake says he would also like to go, but first he says he is incompetent. No, he will be able to move a lot of manpower, but he is the lord of that land, and he cannot stand still and just watch, and his knights really think, and in this they agree that they want to go alongside the Duke, and Agnos is a bit confused. He asks if Anna would stay alone behind, but the Lord orders him not to worry, after all his daughter can help a little here. But Agnes asks if he would take a child to such a dangerous place. She says she wants to go and asks him to see the thing, and she starts to channel her power by invoking a sylphid. Then they notice that she is a spiritualist and that they say they discovered this recently, and notice that she is capable of using spiritual arts. So it is explained to us that like magic, only those who were born with it are capable of using arts. Spiritualists, in fact, spiritualists are even rarer than mages, but most kingdoms have less than 100 spiritualists, counting the weakest, and Joshua says he never imagined finding one of them there. And he keeps looking at the girl, but he says he never heard talk about a spiritualist called Anna, but that girl is familiar to him, so Agnos decides to leave and says that his knights will guide in the vanguard while LCK's knights will protect the rear, and everyone stayed in positions between them, and so he thanks Duke and they leave. But Agnos continues thinking to himself that it would be good to get a spiritualist, and Anna soon starts to join Babel's side, and Josa starts to think that he will stay a little close to her, and if she goes crucial to his plans he will remember. So the Lord starts looking at the boy and calls him and says he will keep an eye on the boy, and then in the throne room of the Avalon Kingdom the king finds out about Joshua's deeds, and he asks if it's true that he blocked the Joker skills this, even though he is a rank B hunter, so he even managed to counterattack, and Evergrande says yes, and the king says he wants to listen to his words as the best mage in the empire, not as a knight. And then he says that as said the majesty, it's difficult to speak hastily as a wizard, and knights and wizards use mana differently, but the king just asks him to say what he felt and asks how far the boy will get, so he says that instead of giving an abstract limit he will explain through the terms used by the imperial knights. So the king asks him to go ahead, so he says that against Sir Valmon, even though he hasn't fought one-on-one yet, he says that if he fought it would be impossible for Evergrande to lose, and the king agrees with that, even though he says he is one unparalleled talent, is the most exceptional person in the empire. Valmon would end up losing if he went against him, but Evergrande says that Joshua and Valmon were not equal, so the king asks if he is about to say that he would lose to that boy, but the wizard says that is not it, but he felt something. He says that possibly he will be able to defeat him in 10 years, or maybe even less than that, but currently he wouldn't defeat him. But after saying that, the king asks something else, and he questions Evergrande if he were in an X1 against him who would win, but the magician's hands are tied and he cannot give an answer, and the king understands and says that if he had known of such talent he would not have just sent the crown prince, but would have gone personally to Joshua, and with that the king snaps his fingers and Jaqen appears there immediately. Then the king asks if he can make the boy stay in the palace for a while, but Jaqen says that as far as he knows the fourth prince is already making preparations, and in this he explains that a letter of recommendation from the fourth prince for the imperial knights has been sent not long ago. Of course it was about Joshua, so Ray says that a letter of recommendation was also an option, and knowing this he asks that if it happens he reports directly to him, so Jaqen leaves and the king starts laughing and thinks that if Joshua is so talented he may be suitable for that. And still in the forest of beasts with night falling, Joshua is surrounded by several goblins, and he claims that he is very screwed, and going back in time a little they are pitching their tents near the forest of beasts. So while they are in a meeting Lord Nanho runs to them wondering why they stopped their march and made camp there, because the forest of black creatures is right in front of them, and if they are in such an open space the monsters could start and attack. Surprise, but in this one of them thinks that the Lord alone doesn't know what's going on. Then again he doesn't care about anything other than his own desires, but Agnos asks him how little attention he was thinking. You can tell how the forest works just looking, and Lord really didn't know how it works, so he asks, and Agnos says he's talking about the times when the monsters come out. He says when night comes the monsters come out of the forest like water, but on a night with a red moon they are especially bad. But there is an even bigger problem on their hands. The intervals between their attacks have become increasingly shorter, which has scared the citizens, and Agnos says that night will fall soon and they will not be able to see well since the monsters will come in mass, so there is no need for them to enter the forest. And then the guy starts to flatter the Duke, and he says he didn't have that vision, and Agnos says that if he understands he should go quickly and prepare the equipment. And then the Lord goes, and when he leaves Agnos says to the two Babel, and Joshua keeps his posts, and the boys say they understand the message, and with that Joshua's eyes begin to shine as he collects sticks to make firewood. His companion says that that is enough, but Joshua says that it is not yet and he can go first. Then they both leave him behind, and Josh, when he notices that they are gone, drops all the firewood and starts to gather air in his hand. Then he invokes the Lucia while saying that it is his only chance. He starts to enter the forest, but the Lord Buello Cute keeps watching him from afar with a look not good. Then we are told that the Stone of Creation is a magical enhancing item that contains the power of creation, so the ancient wizards named it the Stone of Creation, and it is believed that there are stones of creation for water, fire, wind, lightning, ice, and every other element, but the world has only discovered 5 of them, and at this point all 5 have yet to be discovered. A creation stone can strengthen a first first-class magic circle to a third-class magic circle, and it is a coveted item not just for mages but also for knights. And Joshua says that if he is not mistaken, there was a stone of creation in the deepest part of the forest of creatures, and he claims that if he can just find the stone of creation, he will be able to control his excess power. And he thinks that it's been an hour since he started walking, and he starts to wonder if he needs to continue to the center, and he feels like he'll only go from there. But as he takes a few steps, he starts to feel a tremor that shakes everything. An ogre pops up, cutting down some trees that were there, and Joshua is worried. After all, the ogre is blocking the way to the center of the forest, and he understands that the monster is immune to most low-level spells, and it is necessary to be at least a B rank knight to face it. Front with him, but Joshua can't back down. After all, black ogres are lonely monsters, and if he fills Lukia with those energies like he did in the test, he can kill him quickly, and he says the monster will notice him if he gets within 10 meters, so he needs it. Make a single jump from there and cut off the animal's head, but when he was about to do that, the monster starts to roar, and even though it's just a roar, Joshua is impressed by such pressure, so he thinks he needs to finish it. But when he looks at the black ogre is already on top of him, ready for him to land a blow, and he thinks that if he doesn't dodge, he will end up dead, and so at the last second he manages to throw himself back, avoiding being hit by that punch. But even so, he is still under a lot of pressure, so he starts to retreat, and he realizes that the moon is red, and if he faces the black ogre head on, he will lose, so he needs to hide, and in this he manages to hide behind a tree, and then he thinks he needs to hide all his traces, and in this he remembers an old technique that an assassin king taught him in the Rian era. He says he's a little out of practice, but he still needs to do it. He says that instead of concentrating your mana on a target, you have to maneuver the mana as if it were covering your body and start to become one with the objects around. And finally, he says that it is necessary to stop breathing and just adapt to the place. But while he is doing this, the ogre appears behind him, but even with this face of someone who has found his prey, the ogre ends up ignoring Joshua, and seeing that he got out of danger, he says that it's difficult to move while he's like this, but he needs to go to the center of the forest while his mana is like this. But while he's following his path, he ends up tripping over one of the branches, and the branch breaks with him, and he ends up falling to the ground, and its noise attracts several monsters towards the boy. But even in this situation, he says that maybe it's a good thing. After all, he's been wanting to test this in some way, so he starts swinging Lukia and activates the spear art stage 2 second forms gust of wind, then whirlwind of wind begins to gather over Joshua. And after activating your technique, many of the monsters can't resist, but Joshua can't keep up with it either, and he says he thought he had reached the second stage of the art magic of the spear, but apparently that's not the case. He can't bring out even half the power he normally could, so he starts to think it's because he's in the body of a child. But he says he can't just rest, because seeing the direction in which the monsters are following, they will soon meet the knights who are camped, and he says if that is the case, time is extremely precious. He needs to find the Genesis stone soon to enter the order of the knights as quickly as possible. And already in the camp, the first monsters begin to appear and attack the soldiers, but then Babel takes the lead and starts killing the monsters, and while he continues the killing, Cain takes the lead and begins a show of skill, and Babel begins to wonder who this is. There was such a skilled person among the knights, and he can tell just by his swordsmanship that he gets C or above. And while he continues thinking, they hear another roar, and another horde of monsters approaches, and everyone is scared because more than 100 of these monsters are approaching. But Chiffon approaches, telling them to shut up, and says that he will give a great punishment to anyone who abandons the camp, and in this he forces them to prepare for battle. So the monos advance, but they manage somehow way to beat most of them. Chiffon, in turn, demonstrates a little more of his swordsmanship by swinging his sword and lifting a large part of the area around him, and with just one swing he can kill dozens of monsters. But even so, the situation doesn't improve at all. After all, the monsters have no end. He starts to connect the situation with the red moon that should appear the next day, but even so, it's already in the sky. While he's thinking, a black ogre appears, and he thinks it's that there is only B rank around, so there is no other option than to kill it. But as he runs to the monster saying he would break it in half, the ogre attacks him, throwing him away, so everyone is worried about the commander, but they still need to run for their own lives. And Chiffon on the ground wonders what happened, and he wonders if the ogre became so agile with the help of the red moon. But Agnos arrives behind him, saying that knights shouldn't lose their composure in any situation, so he says he will take care of it now, and so he walks calmly towards the monsters, stopping in front of them, and just with a swing of his sword, hundreds of them are eradicated from the map, so some of them are even scared, and Chiffon realizes that with a single swing he was capable of doing all this, and this is the power of one of the 9 stars of the continent. Meanwhile, our Prota finishes the battle where he was, and then walks slowly towards a cliff, and at the tip of it the boy pronounces the word Bronto, and so the stone that was down below, he starts to react to him, and returning to the camp, Babel is shaking, looking at what his father was capable of doing, and the lord of those lands starts to say that that is his father. He is sure that he will become like that, since he has the blood of it running through his veins. He thinks with himself that Babel is still a child, and no matter how talented he is, this will be his first time witnessing such a thing, and it makes a lot of sense that he would be so surprised. So as he thinks about it, he remembers that Joshua is not present, and he goes to Chiffon asking about the boy, and then Chiffon realizes that he hasn't or has seen him recently, and the lord begins to assume that the boy has run away alone to try to live, and begins to say that this is why they shouldn't associate with inferior things and the knights. They start to wonder if he really had run away, and the fact that they hadn't seen the boy recently starts to weigh on them. But while they don't stop talking bad about Joshua, Agnes shouts at them saying that the battle isn't over yet, and so the Duke tells them they wake up, and then Babel gets excited and starts saying that the radiant glory of Agnos will be with them, and goes after the monsters, and the knights also join in attacking the monsters, and and they start running from them, and one of them starts to brag, saying that will do with that they are no longer able to crawl out of the forest. But in the middle of this chase, the monsters start to fly, and everyone is in disbelief, and they see that what is happening is that a horde of black ogres was heading towards them, and soon after the first roar, the ogres start to attack the soldiers, and they have no peace because in addition to the ogres, the smaller monsters are also chasing them, and seeing the chaos that the battlefield has become, Shiffin starts to think that he didn't think it would be easy to finish them off, but one horde of black ogres, the thing, it got very difficult, but he starts to feel a strange AA coming. Then Joshua appears in the sky surrounded by several lightning bolts, and so he attacks the head of one of the ogres with his staff embedded in lightning, and he knocks the monster down with just one blow, and everyone is in disbelief with what they are seeing, and Agnos is proud of his son. And then Count Joshua falls on top of the monster he killed, and Shiffin is wondering if a boy of that size really killed a black ogre that was twice his strength due to the moon. Red and still with a single attack, but the cute cake starts shouting that it's impossible, that he just saw it, and asks what trick Joshua used, and he says that the boy was hiding and the only good thing is to appear at the right time, and he says that of course it wasn't him. After all, the Duke would have killed this monster with a single attack. He starts to order the knights to help the Duke quickly, and with that, the knights start to think that he really must have arrived on time, because no matter how intelligent he is, Count Joshua is only a knight of rank C. It doesn't make sense for him to have killed a black ogre, that even a knight of rank B would have even more difficulty killing a monster like that with a single attack. Then they go on the attack saying they will help Duke, but Joshua from afar starts to say no, he wants to be despised more, so it's hurting his pride, and so he says he's going to surprise them a little, and he says that even if he faints because his body can't withstand the attack, that monster will save him. And right after they go after the ogres, they are going through trouble, so Josa asks the knights to move away from danger if they don't want to get caught in it, so he starts imbuing his metal rod with electricity, and says that he has become capable of using Bronto's power to a certain extent since the compatibility with him is high, but he can't say to what extent his body will be able to withstand this ability, so he still hits the ogre with everything he has using his lightning wind, and in that not just one but two ogres are almost obliterated by the boy. But after the Joshua's attack is completely over, and so the Lord K falls to the ground in disbelief, and the knights finally realize that Joshua actually killed the ogre, this same ogre that has skin that cannot be scratched if it is not the sword aura of a knight of rank B. They begin to wonder if this really is the ability of a novice knight of rank C, but they are sure that it was not, because they have never seen or heard about mana having elemental properties, and so one of them begins to question whether Joshua would be one magic swordsman. And meanwhile, the boy is shaking more than a green stick, but even so he wants to remain standing, and his father notices this from afar. He doesn't want to show himself by being weak, and in this Armand goes to Agnos and says that the boy really is incredible, and it makes sense that Agnos is keeping an eye on him, so Agnos asks if he saw something in the boy, but he says that he is not sure about the ranks of the knights, but like the wizard, seeing how he is using a double conjuration that requires a class higher than a master class 3, he says that the boy is a monster who has the ability to change the country and maybe even the history of the continent. While he was going to continue talking about what Agner is trying to achieve, he says he understands what he is saying, and at that Joshua begins to collapse, but as he was about to fall, a black ogre began to threaten to attack him, but he was unable to do so. After all, Agnes broke him into pieces while holding his son in his arms, and after being saved by Agnes, Joshua ends up fainting, and then he wakes up in the middle of a dream where the Agnos duchy is on fire, but even though it's a dream it seems too real for that, so from the middle of the fire he sees Babel all bloody coming out with a sword in his hands, and Joshua realizes that this is the scene where the duchy is destroyed, but this is something that should only happen in 10 years, and he considers what is happening as a precognitive dream, and he thinks this could be due to the power of Bronto, and if this is the stone of creation then has more chance than necessary, and he realizes that even the wizards of the tower, they have not yet fully discovered the powers of the stone of creation, and while he is thinking, a violent gust of wind hits Babel in the middle of the chest, and soon Joshua sees who is responsible for this wind, with a woman and a gigantic lion by her side. He recognizes her as Anna Velgrace, accompanied by the upper-class spirit of the sea lion of the wind, and finally, he remembers Anna. Now after seeing the sea lion, he realizes that something like this happened between the Agnos duchy and Anna, and he realizes that the fact that this woman was here, it probably means that that guy, Professor Diana, is there too. He starts to notice that he is not able to hear anything that is being said there, and Joshua notices that a silent spell has been placed on him, and seeing that another character has appeared there, but he cannot see or hear nothing, he starts to get closer to be sure who he is, and in the middle of the confusion, Babel stands up saying that Agnos will never be on his knees just because of a mixed-race sane organization, but the man who threatened him starts to laugh. Then the lion attacks Babel, and seeing that he incapacitated the boy, the man who was attacking him decides to leave, and finally Joshua sees the man's face and recognizes him as Draxia, but the end of the dream was near, so he starts to wake up, and when he wakes up he screams his name, Draxia Velgrace, and seeing that he woke up in a normal bed, he says that this was more similar to the precognitive dream than normal, so he wonders how much time has passed and soon realizes that he still feels pain as his body is still unable to bear it, so he says he entered in the second stage after the first stage of the magical spear art, but the second stage of the magical spear art is similar to the skills of the best C rank knights. However, if it is the power of the magical spear art that he used against the monsters he may be able to go against recently B rank knights, then he says that this was probably only possible because of Bronto's power, which has the electrical attribute. Furthermore, if the precognitive dream is another Bronto power, he has an even greater need to look for. Even more the creation stones, and while he is thinking, Agnos talks to the boy, then he realizes that he was there the whole time, and Agnos starts his monologue saying that the red moon that seemed to swallow the entire world until a few hours ago simply disappeared, and now an extremely beautiful moonlight like this took its place, and Joshua is left without reaction seeing his father talk about it. So Agnos says that they will be going to the gym as soon as they return to the duchy, and as he explained before, his external identity now it's not anymore. Joshua von Agnos, the boy, from now on he is the only son of the fallen Viscount Fred, someone who is desperately trying to rebuild the Viscount, and Joshua accepts it immediately and says that he will accept these conditions because nothing good will come from being the center of attention after all. For now, the most important thing is recover all the strength he had in his past life, and while he organizes his plans, Agnos talks to him and says that while he was sleeping he said a very interesting name, Drax Velgrace. Then his father asks how he knows the name of this damn thing. However, he decides to leave this matter aside and tells him to rest well because tomorrow they will be returning to the duchy. So in another place inside Castle Lock, in a secret room, the Lord asks Chiffon if Sister Vanessa knows about this fact. He says that she is aware, and he actually asks if she is staying silent even though she has seen someone who could possibly put the position of Babel's heir in danger, but Chiffon says that is not the case as there was no need until recently, not very long ago. A while ago Joshua was just a child who performed the task in the stables, and he says that no one knew that a child like that was hiding such an incredible talent, and the Lord says if it is as he said, that illegitimate child awakened that talent alone, and he states that you definitely can't believe that because even Babel, who is the greatest talent in the empire, managed to reach that position. Only after sweating blood over the Duke's teachings did he only get to where he is after the duchy's systematic education. Since he was young, however, that illegitimate child did not receive any teaching or even undergo systematic training, and he has difficulty believing that he was able to eliminate the Black Ogre with the skills of a knight greater than the C rank. He says that it was not even close to the skills of a C rank, because he asks if among all the C rank knights that were there, who of them could perform those skills that he showed, and Chiffon says that it is really impossible for him to be in the C rank. He says that all the knights are alert, and that's why they started talking about maybe Joshua being a magical swordsman, but the Lord says he doesn't believe that Bastard is a magical swordsman, and if you take into consideration all the other circumstances, surely to another option that would have more credibility, and he says that gaining this enormous amount of power in a single day would probably come from a contract with a demon, and a high-ranking one, but Chiffon says that this is impossible because he was recognized in front of all the royal knights including Duke. He was also there and didn't feel any demonic magic at the time, but Duke says he didn't understand, and what matters is not whether or not he made a contract with the high-ranking demon, and Sheila is unsure of what he is saying, but soon realizes the Lord's intentions, and the Lord says that fortunately his mental age is very different from his abilities. He will use this opportunity to show that his immature attitude will eventually suffocate his own life. And then Chiffon asks why he's going to do it, but first he says he'll need to keep an eye on that illegitimate child, and he says it's a very good coincidence that his daughter is also planning on going to the Palace Academy this time, and Chiffon says it might be easier to get information using his own tactic, but the Lord says he just wants him to be considerate about it, and if by chance that child starts to desire the position of heir, then it will become extremely problematic, and Chiffon understands that only we'll have to take care of the boy before something like this happens, and then Lord says he will trust him to take the necessary measures, so he leaves the room, leaving Chiffon to wonder if there really was a demon involved in this. Meanwhile, in the Duchy, Agonos Cox goes to talk to his miss, saying it's an urgent message. Then she asks him why he's so agitated. Then he says that Joshua's achievement of climbing the forest of demonic creatures has finally ended, and he says that they will be returning today to the Duchy. They will have a great banquet, but even hearing this, Sherry does not show any kind of excitement, and Cox says that he thought that hearing this she would be more excited, but she asks him why he thinks that, and also states that he was not very happy to see Joshua. Also, however, he says that at the time the boy was just a bastard child, but now he is the first 10-year-old to become a mana user on the entire continent, and he says that their house has wealth and reputation more than enough, but there is not much that they can achieve with just that. So he asks the lady if she knows why Duke Font sent her there, so she says it is because of the mercenary king, and she suggests that it was because of him that her father wanted to make her the bride of Babel. However, she says that she just thinks so because she wouldn't have imagined that the mercenary king would have allied with the Crumbell Duchy. So we are explained a little about the Bavarian mercenary king, and it is said that he is the master swordsman who was the first commoner to achieve the skill level of a rank knight. Furthermore, he is a well-known figure who reached the pinnacle of being the master of the axe, and as one of the 12 superhumans he could compete for the 9 absolute positions whenever he wanted, and he was recognized as a legend among mercenaries, and seeing how he gathered all those who had no affiliation, he was called the mercenary king. But the real problem is that there was news that the mercenary king had started secretly working with the Crumbell Shire, and that Shire was a family that had an incredible amount of wealth in the Avalon Empire just below the Source House, and there was no escape from the conflict between these two families since they were both from the merchant lineage, that they were now almost starting a battle for land, and Sherry says that it doesn't matter if the information is true or not, but if so there's nothing they can do, and she says it's not like they can tell the people around what's going on, and Cox says she's fine alert because as close as the two families are to being merchants, they are very sensitive. Rumors, and if by chance rumors about the two families fighting over land are spread around the world, he can already see how other families who are looking for a chance to gain commercial rights will act. However much the Imperial Palace prohibits land battles, and for no reason they are fighting a silent battle, but in the end, if the battle really happens, the whole world will know about it, and whoever dominates the opponent in the shortest amount of time will hold the key to everything. And Sherry realizes that her family is after people who can't be controlled by money like the Mercenary King, so that's why they're wanting to connect her and babble with the engagement. So Cox says she is doing great and knows things, but she reacts differently and says she really likes strong people, but she doesn't know what to do with the bitter feeling she gets from being used like that. So Cox says she reacted very strangely, as she should be happy to be the main part of this tactic, and she asks if couldn't just ask Agnos for help, but Cox is said to be very different from the Mercenary King, and she must understand that for the nobles their pride is the most important thing. Even more so if they are one of the 5 duchies, and the duchy at the moment thinks there is no need for them to beg for help since they are not in a state of emergency, and he feels that she is acting like she doesn't care on the outside, but in reality she doesn't like the Earl of Babel, so he says he doesn't want her to be sacrificed in the name of protecting the Shire. He says who felt that she wasn't acting like she was acting in front of Babel in front of Joshua, so he hopes that she can have a sincere conversation at least once with him, and at that the girl gets emotional, and at that he says that he will find a way to bring the two so they can talk alone. And that night during the banquet celebrations, Joshua ends up just wanting to leave, but Cain starts sucking up to him unconditionally, so he says it would be weird if someone heard him talking to him like that, and he says that finally decided that he will serve Joshua forever, but he says he can still refuse, but Cain says he wouldn't be so foolish to reject a subordinate who will be a master in the future, and Joshua recognizes that Cain is very shameless, but he doesn't even care about that call. Then Joshua says he will go back to his room for today, and says he is being sincere with everything he said because besides Joshua's monstrous abilities he feels he can still learn a lot from the boy, and seeing this Joshua says he will think hard about what he is saying. Joseph begins to think that in his past life he also rejected many people wanting to work for him because as he had sworn loyalty to the king he would be careful if he started to gather people around Joshua, but he regrets this a lot and wonders for Caesar betrayed him. He remembers the pain he felt in those memories, then he remembers years ago asking him how he knows Draxia's name, and he says he can't forget. After all, when he was being betrayed, the person he thought was his longtime friend was also there, but while he is mulling it over where his servant arrives talking to him asking if he would not go to the banquet, but Joshua says that he has already made it clear that he would not go to that banquet, but he says that it is not the banquet but a meal that Duchess Vanessa prepared it separately. He says that at this meal his mother Lucia will also be present. This automatically changes Joshua's face, and upon entering the Halland soon sees his mother is happy, so Vanessa asks him to come in, and she says that this is the first time the two meet, and while she welcomes Chiffon starts talking shit, but Joshua soon stops her with an absurd look at the doormat, and his mother asks him to say hello to her, and he introduces himself as one of the Waters, and this does Madame gets furious, but she decides to maintain her pose. After all, she won't be coming soon, and so there's no need to stress. Then she says she didn't feel comfortable talking before, but as he's going to the capital, she thought it would be a good time, but in this Joshua's mother is surprised with his going to the capital. Then Chiffon states that the boy was named as a CO rank Knight Duke will take him to the Arcadia Academy, and then the boy's mother vibrates with happiness, and the snake starts to say that he called there so that they celebrated the occasion, and she starts to apologize for not having taken care of them until then, and even asks them to forget any rixa that may exist between them. So Joshua's mother says that there is no bad feeling between them, and the snake says that it is good. So he asks him to bring a meal for them to serve at the table. Joshua seems to have understood something there, and so he calls the boy to the table, and his mother advises him to have good manners with his aunt, and with that she starts trying to get along, make friends with the boy's mother, being as kind as possible. Then she says that she would like to bond even more with them with this meal, and when Lucia was about to put the food in her mouth, Joshua tells them to wait and says that before they eat, he would like to apologize for something he apologizes for not having greeted her beforehand, even though she takes care of him and his mother, but Vanessa says it's okay, and he shouldn't worry about it and just eat as much as he wants, but he says he can't accept such consideration even though she prepared the meeting for they. After all, on their side there are so many delicious things, but on her side there is almost no food, and he says that this is the last meal he would like everyone to be able to eat together, and he thinks to himself that his life has been threatened thousands of times in the most diverse ways, and poison clearly it was one of them, and as he thought Vanessa put poison in his food, he is sure it is ponderosa, a poisonous pine that is discreet and difficult to find traces of it. He says that because it is the first time they have eaten together they were going to join us until dishes, but she starts to put Miguel on the diet to avoid junk food, but Joshua starts to flatter her saying that Vanessa doesn't need to be careful with her weight because she is pretty enough, and as a result she starts to suspect that he has noticed the poison that she put in the food, and she starts to think that because he is so skilled he would probably suspect her if she didn't eat anything, using her diet as an excuse, and then he asks her why she is thinking so much and asks the can if she had poisoned the food. At that Chiffon starts to throw a tantrum saying that he is being disrespectful to the Duchess with that joke, but Joshua puts it on the table saying that the only person who is being disrespectful there is him, and the boy asks if Chiffon knows who he is, and Chiffon realizes the boy's murderous intention and is impressed that someone that age can control his abilities. At this point he goes back to talk to his aunt, and he says it was just a joke, but from Chiffon's reaction it seems like it wasn't one, and then he asks if she actually poisoned his food, and then they show their true faces, and Chiffon starts to say that the punishment for releasing the noble is immediate execution, and says that he can't just watch this even though he has his lord's blood, and Joshua is incredulous at the boldness from him to raise his sword in front of him, and in that he says that he can't ignore today's Ponderosa and what happened tonight, and seeing the mana that the boy is emanating, he notices that Joshua, it's more like a B rank. He still notices the artifact with special magic that the boy has, but as he has already raised his sword, he can't back down, and as a result he starts to fear for the boy's future and decides to get rid of him right then and there. And then they hear someone shouting and asking what everyone is doing. While that Evergrande goes to Tsar, he delivers one letter from the Duchy Agnos, and Tsar thinks that Joshua has finally made up his mind, and when he opens the letter believing that Josa would have accepted his call, he starts laughing. Then he tears the letter into pieces, saying that Joshua is really very interesting, and returning to the two hotheads, the Duke arrives at the place and asks what they are doing with this. Chiffon stops, but Vanessa comes in front and starts to say that she called Lucia and Joshua because she thought it would be nice to have a meal with them before they leave, and she emphasizes the fact that he be taking them to the capital. And the look at the whole scene, he asks if they still continued with the scene, and then the two put away their weapons, and then he tells the mother and children to go back to their rooms as they will leave the next morning. With that said, the two leave, and Vanessa starts to ask what happened to him. After all, he never had all that paternal love. And then he asks if Vanessa hates him, and she doesn't deny her hatred, and he asks her what exactly she hates, and if it's the fact that he's interested in Joshua in the moment, and she says that bringing that illegitimate child into her presence is too much, and she questions if he married her for that, but she says that she didn't care about him from the beginning. After all, she was always brought up first for him, and she says that she won't speak nothing because she was born noble, and she was forced into her arranged marriage because she didn't really love him, but she says she won't stay quiet if Babel receives any negativity because of Joshua. She says that just as the duchy is everything to him, Babel is also everything to she. Then she starts talking about his respect for the strongest noble empire, but he asks if she knows what that is, and asks her if someone who knows what about her would do something like that, and she plays dumb, but he asks if she really thought he wouldn't find out. Then Chiffon realizes that Duke already knows everything in his room. Joshua gets worried and thinks that Duke must have been upset, and he remembers his mother being confused because they left her out of all matters, so he thinks she was pretending. Being a worried mother doesn't change the past. And then Kane goes to him asking if he had a good meal, and then he reveals that he knew about Joshua's departure because of the butler who said that Joshua had gone to eat a delicious meal. Then the boy realizes that the butler is also in plot with everyone, that they wanted to poison him, and he realizes that almost everyone is on the side of that snake. So Kane says that he found out about his going to the academy, and he says that there is a place where he can sharpen his powers safely. He even says that there will be more chances to learn something if the two are in the same place. Then he asks if Kane would have gone there just for that, but he claims that everything he said before was true, and then he kneels to the boy and asks if he would give him the honor of serving him as his lord. And Joshua recognizes that having powerful allies is important, but first he will have to do something, so he asks if Kane at least knows the path he will take, and he says that the path he intends to follow is full of blood, and people criticized him if he is with Joshua. So he asks if Kane would still follow him, and he says that a knight just follows and trusts his master even if the path is bloody and smelly, and he says that this is a choice he can only make once in his life, but still he wants to bet on Joshua, so he raises his sword and asks for this opportunity, and with that Joshua accepts his knight's determination. And the next morning they are leaving, and Agnos talks to Joshua if he will be okay, because even though he is a noble fallen, he will still need more than a knight. But the boy asks if he has forgotten his lifestyle. He states that just one person is more than enough. While they follow, Sherry goes to them and apologizes for appearing in such a situation, but says let them go without a proper farewell is not very polite, and Duke asks if she is better now, and Sherry says that she has improved thanks to him. So as she speaks, Agnos realizes that the girl's rebellious way has changed a lot, but as soon as he says that, she starts to want to come back to his usual self, and she says that this suits her more, so he asks her if she wants to go to the capital with them, but she denies it, saying that she needs to visit her family and Cox's companion. But finally she gets down to business and says that there is something she would like to do, tell Joshua in private, and at that he is worried that that girl would invent this time, but she says that she just wants to give him something, so she takes the S family crest out of her pocket and says that he should visit his family's duchy when he goes to CAD, and in that Cox freak out. And when Joshua asks what do you mean by that, she says to face it with an invitation, so she sends the boy to visit the duchy. When they arrive in Arcadia, I hear this from the knights questioning why Sherry would be so cordial with Joshua. Then the knight next to her deduces that she is interested in the boy, but the another informs his friend that her only romantic interest is Count Babel. But the first guy continues to believe that she likes Joshua. After all, Shelley is not married or anything to Babel, yet Joshua notices that the knights see her as a very important figure, so if he refuses her offer in front of everyone, this news would certainly spread far and wide, and as his worst nightmare being discovered, Joshua feels that it would take at least 5 years for him to be able to have it again. His identity is hidden like now, so Sherry starts crying and says that she just wanted to give him something in return to make up for the fact that she was so rude to him before. Joshua understands the girl's game and takes the coat of arms, saying that they will need to leave a journey soon, and then he leaves her behind. And when Agnes, he asks if he can also go to the duchy of his kingdom, and the girl readily allows him to go there. After all, he is always welcome in that. Agnos states that he will prepare a drink from the kingdom heart before going because her father is a well-known drinker. That said, he says goodbye to her and man cocks and says that they will meet again soon, and before continuing on the journey, he feels that Joshua still hasn't understood the meaning and receive a symbol of a noble family still. More given by the daughter of their family. Meanwhile, in the great royal palace of the Avalon Empire, Marcos is informed that Joshua and Agnos will arrive at the capital within 3 days. Furthermore, it is reported that Joshua's recommendation to join the Order of the Imperial Knights was rejected. In this, Marcos is in doubt as to why Joshua would deny such a privileged position as this. He deduces that the boy is trying to take control of the Agnos duchy only through his strength, but his servant thinks that this is not the case because in the letter in which Joshua sent it to Prince Caesar, he had said that he would not need the recommendation of someone like Khazar, and instead of accepting this, he preferred to follow the emperor's command and walk according to the laws of the empire. But hearing this, Marcos bursts into laughter because he does not believe that Joshua will follow his orders after all. The boy will probably break them with just his own power. That being said, he claims to be eager to see him break the laws that the Order of Knights is proud of. And after 4 days, Joshua and the others arrive in Arcady, and then they are introduced to the mansion where they will stay. Kane says that that place is still the same, so Jay asks if he has already been there, and Kane explains that he visited that place with the Duke in his youth. And hearing this, the girl wonders if Kane he really was so close to Doke. After all, he's just a skilled guy and nothing more than that. Joshua states that he never heard of the name Knight Kane before his return because he apparently became an ordinary knight when he couldn't overcome his limit. But still, taking this into consideration, Joshua assures him that he won't let him fail as a knight now that he is on his wing. Kane gives some more context about this story and says that the Duke only brought him there with the intention of testing these skills. After all, it is a silent place and suitable for this, so Joshua's mother calls them to take a look at the place, and when they enter the mansion, Lucia notes that the environment is very spacious inside too. And as for Joshua, he decides to go out alone for a bit, but Kane says that he might end up getting lost because this is his first time in the capital, but the boy calmly saying that he will be fine with it. He arrives at the central area of the capital, Arcady, and then he finds the tavern he was looking for, and when an unknown boy comes to talk to him and says he is after a red coin that was buried at the bottom of Lake Ralph. The boy guides him to that place, and when he gets there, Joshua confirms that he is in the right place and says that he will need a secret informant who is able to look at the past in which he lived, and for Josa, a man in front of him, due to his qualifications more suitable for this. Furthermore, he is just an ordinary young man who will not raise many suspicions, and upon arriving at the bar, the boy is taken to a room that has a secret passage, so the boy opens the passage for Josa to enter, and the boy notes that he can trust him as apparently he will not leak any information even without receiving a dragon heart. In this, the young man tells Josa to go down the stairs carefully, and after finally reaching another guy, the young man introduces Josa as a customer and then proceed to another door, but the boy guarantees that this will be the last door they will pass through. After all, he has already passed through 3 rooms, and when they get there, Joshua notes a suspicious hole in the wall and deduces that they exchange information through this. So the young man asks the boy what type of information he is looking for in this. Joshua says he finds it funny that the branch manager is willing to give mere third-degree information. After all, this means that the organization is lacking employees, and the young man is surprised that the boy knows a little about his organization and asks why. Joshua deduces that he is the branch manager, so Joshua explains that for an information organization, the basics are that a certain security is maintained, but to keep things that way, the informants' identities are kept hidden among them even though they work for the same branch, and a distinct characteristic of this type of organization is that the head office has total control over each branch, therefore the normal informants, they don't know the identity of the agency manager. In this, Joshua states that he also paid attention to how the young man was treated with such cordiality, and in this, that guy notices who he is dealing with and says that the rumors about Joshua, the second son of the Agnos Duchy, are not exaggerated, and when he notices his look, Joshua Anna, that the boy knows him from somewhere, the young man explains that Joshua is the boy who is gaining prominence throughout the empire, so it is natural that he knows him, and then Joshua notes that the manager is indeed very sagacious after all. Duke Agnos himself took care that his identity was kept secret, and although he is very skilled, Joshua feels busy knowing that the manager could sell his information, and the manager notices that the boy is looking nervous, so he explains that the only ones who they know his identity, it's him and some of his men. That said, he decides to present himself late and says he is Zero, the commander of the company at the Door of the Moon in Arcady. In this, he asks more about who brought Joshua there, but before that the boy asks why he chose room 3 to take them, but in his mind Joshua only imagines that he can only receive information from rank 3 being in that room. Zero explains that this would be one of the reasons, however, he will only provide rank 1 information to Josa because if he gets some points with Joshua, this investment will cost him practically nothing, and upon hearing this, Joshua soon notices that he has no intention of asking him for something very valuable in the future. After all, he doesn't would help with rank 1 information for free. That being said, he explains that he was looking for an object called Heirloom of the Count's family orbs. In this, Zero reports that the majority of the family's orbs are sent to the black market. However, to be able to retrace the steps to get there, they took a week. So Joshua is once again worried about his information leak because he will have problems if they find out that he is secretly snooping on others. In this, he decides to start by placing a bait to attract everyone's attention because this way he will get rid of 2 problems in one. So he states that the person who finding the red coin that was buried at the bottom of Lake Ralph will receive the blessing of the moon. The person who finds the medal will receive the lunar door, and hearing this, no one is surprised because this information is only known by a small number of people. In this, Josa proposes to find this stone for Zero in up to 3 years. If he listens to his conditions, then Zero states that the fact that the coin has disappeared or not doesn't even matter anymore. The competition for the successor to the lunar door was concluded a year ago. In addition, his organization already spent decades looking for this coin, but before accepting Joshua's offer, he asks to hear the boy's conditions, so Joshua says he shouldn't leak the questions he asks now, and also about what they talk about Drax Velgrace. And after 2 months since Josa contacted Zero, he continues training to regain his strength and is also working to move Lucia to the Duke's property so that her mother will be safer from the invasion of intruders. Although she did not want to separate her from her son, Joshua convinced her to obey him, and a week after that, before admission to the academy, Kane asks if the boy has something in mind. After all, he noticed him very anxious these last few days, so Joshua gets lost in his thoughts and thinks about the deadline that Zero had given him to tell him the location of the object he is looking for. After all, it has been 2 months and nothing has happened to contact him, and how he should enter the gym soon. This delay will have a big impact on his plans, and speaking of him, Zero will go to the boy, but when Kane sees him, he already becomes suspicious, but Joshua says that knows him, so he won't have to worry. With that being said, Zero states that he managed to acquire the information that Joshua wanted. Therefore, he will charge him for the rest of the work. After that, Joshua deduces that he wants to ask him something in return, since in the future, he can obtain more profit. That said, Zero will leave, so Joshua explains that the Orbs family was a family of renowned wizards that rival the Rebrika family in the Avalon Empire, and at one time, the Orbs family were the only ones who were not treated with contempt. After all, they were Avalon wizards. In addition, the head of family defeated the knights who were in Byra of the Master rank, so this gave extra morale to the family Orbs. Apart from this achievement, he was also the first to introduce the concept of battle mage on the continent, and this achievement received a lot of attention in the country from the magic called Earth. In this, the king of that country tried to bring the head of the Orbs family to his country. Although they were very exalted, a while later, they ended up falling into ruins at the hands of the imperial family of their own country. In this, Joshua checks the records and notes that the royal family is purposely punishing its nobles, and when reading the baron's name, Pruvlon confirms in the documents. Kane states that he knows him. After all, he is very famous in the underworld, and because of this, all the items that go to black trade pass through him and beyond. In addition, he is also the brother of Viscount Bag, and in the middle of the conversation, he goes to his table with his daughter, so we are explained a little about how the position of nobility works in this case. The higher the position of the noble, the closer to the palace their lands remain, and Provolone is one of the 3 most influential men in the underworld hidden in Arcad. So Provolone welcomes Cheen to his house, and the boy gets straight to the point and states that the deadline for their promise has already passed. And when asked about his deadline has already run out, Provolone explains that elves are very rare, therefore they are difficult creatures to capture. Having said that, he asks for a little more time, but Shun states that he only entrusted this work to him because he didn't want to hear excuses, so Provolone apologizes again. Even so, the Count gives him a week to get the elves, and Provolone gets excited at the time, promising not to disappoint him. This time, however, the Count explains that if he fails once again, he will be prohibited from enjoying the wonders of the city, so Provolone says that we'll take these words into consideration, and after the boy leaves the room, the butler goes to him and brings him a drink and suggests that the Baron rest a little. After all, he doesn't think it's at all likely that the elves will be found in just a week, but I hear that Provolone it doesn't state who will make this possible regardless of the difficulty, otherwise he will lose all his reputation. After all, the boy is the only son of the Marquis Vilas, who is basically the person with the greatest authority in the military force. Meanwhile, the boy's servant asks if Sheen really believes that Provolone will find elves in such a short time. The boy says that this will be a difficult thing to do, so the servant asks the Count why he did this, and Shan says that it is a reason why he gave Provolone an extra week. Then he asks the servant what is the most important thing for a king when he is managing his subordinates, and he responds that it is a carrot and a stick. In that, Shan says that carrots are indeed important, however he makes an assumption saying that if Foal is very not fat, would be able to pick up a carrot if given to him, so the servant deduces that the colt needs the stick. This Shan says he is right, therefore the stick is the most important thing for a king when managing his subordinates. After all, with this technique, they are capable of making any subordinate obedient. In that, Saro asks the Count what he intends to do if Provolone does not bring the links in time, and Shun states that he will crush him because by doing so he will be even more loyal. And upon hearing the strategy of Boyo, servant is impressed. Shun is seeing inside Provolone and controlling him with a puppet. That being said, they decide to go eat straight away. Different from everyone, but in a good way, because even though he was apparently weak, Rebrika had a warm and friendly personality, and this influenced his behavior towards everyone, including commoners, and because he was kind of commoners, Rebrika was the target of everyone's mockery, but he always remained the same person admired by the commoners. And returning to the meeting between them, Iseline says that she became suspicious of Joshua when she saw the color of his rare hair, but soon realized that the boy was himself, and in the middle of the conversation, Shun and his servant go to them, interrupting. The boy extols Iseline's beauty and begins to ask her several questions, which in turn remains ignored, and upon noticing this, the servant becomes enraged and tells the girl to have more respect for Shun. After all, he is the eldest son of the Marquis Vilas. Kane wonders why the boy would come to eat in such a simple restaurant and tells him he apologizes for his daughter's rudeness and that he is proud to meet his renowned son in the Marquis Villas, and Sheen says no, he's waiting for an apology from him, but from Iseline herself. After all, he can't let this common insult pass. And when you hear this, you notice that the boy is exaggerating because there is no way to guess that such an important person would be in a place like that. Shin goes to the girl and tells her to hurry up with her apology. So Joshua says that the boy is a joke and deduces that his father must really have things to worry about. After all, his son is an irresponsible idiot, and if that happens, the Shun's servant pulls out his sword and tells the boy to reveal his identity. Joshua states that drawing the sword has a great weight, and as the servant is a knight who has learned the way of the sword, he also knows this. So Joshua states that he will have to take responsibility for your actions. In this, the servant feels a very threatening atmosphere seeing Joshua, but Shin continues to order the boy to be punished, and Joshua, in turn, introduces himself as Ving Frederick. There's no need to try to remember your name, and in the meantime at the castle, Lok Juong goes to Anna and comments that they haven't seen each other for a long time. Anna states that he arrived faster than expected, and he explains that he was in a hurry. After all, she called him very suddenly, so something serious could have happened. Then she informs him that the monster appeared in the Agnos Duchy. Zhang asks if she is referring to Babel, and hears him ask this question. Didn't get there. She leaves him up to date and says that he is a second son of Agnos who surpasses many of Babel's powers. So Zhang is surprised to discover that he is an even more talented genius than Babel, and although he was informed of this, he feels betrayed because Anna took a long time to tell him something so important. He would like to use the communication area right away to keep everyone up to date with this, but Ring tells him not to be so hasty because the Agnos Duchy will, at some point, spreading this information on your own. After all, it would greatly increase your family's status. Furthermore, she states that in peaceful times this type of rumor becomes a special power. I hear this. Zhong agrees with her but thinks it's too much arrogance to say that they are living in peaceful terms. In this, he explains that it is a good time most countries were storing forces, but in the end all this power ended up saturating, but still people felt happier if the countries became stronger. However, this stored power would have to be released at some point, and obviously the powerful saw this strength of soldiers as a preface to a war. Anna explains that the proportion of war masters is absolute, therefore no country has no chance to win it. I would like to start it. So the countries are left depending only on information, as it is information that can prevent future wars. Zhong finally understands his lady's thoughts, but he notices that if she called him to talk about the polite second son, Agnes, surely she must not have good news for him. In this, he explains that any wrong step could cost dozens of years of preparation, but Anna says he shouldn't worry. After all, she always has a plan for everything, and in this case she decided that will enroll in the gym located in Arcadia in the capital of Avalon, and upon hearing this, Zhong notices that Agner is precisely in that location, but Anna again states that everything will be fine as she is under control of the situation, and Anna guarantees that she will bring Joshua to her side. And speaking of the boy, he is a minor, expressed by Sean, who says he doesn't know the name of the Frederick family, but Joshua says that whether or not he knows his family is not that relevant. Sean states that this house will disappear soon because he will put the boy in his right place to teach Joshua the consequences of his actions. So he tells the boy to ask for forgiveness on his knees, so he will at least let him go away with just a severed limb. But hearing this, Joshua continues needling the boy, who in turn complains to his servant because he still hasn't stopped that humiliation. So the servant decides to act according to Sheen's wishes and notices that he was only a little suffocated with Joshua's murderous intention, but he soon realized that the boy follows. Being a 10-year-old child, although he is sad about having to kill him, the servant claims that Joshua dug his own grave by defying the Vilas family when trying to attack him. The boy defends the attack with just his arm, then strikes his opponent, placing him on his knees in front of his feet. And when I see this, Sean is impressed because the boy was able to defeat a B-rank knight with just his fists, so he wonders if something like that is really possible, especially coming from a child of just 10 years. At this, Joshua, think about what you're going to do with Shun now. After all, for him, this type of child deserves to be beaten without the slightest chance of forgiveness. Sheen asks about Joshua's true identity, but he is once again confused and says he is Frederick, but Shun claims that the boy is lying because he has never heard of the Frederick family, and when he tells Josa that the crime of pretending to be a noble is one of the most serious, he reaffirms his nobility and says he is the successor of the Marquis family Vilas, one of the 12 families that support the empire. It is in the middle of his high spirits, Joshua gets angry and puts him to kiss the ground, but then tells the boy to get up so he can get closer to him. Joshua asks about the arrogance that the boy showed until recently, and when he was about to continue punishing with Shun, the boy's servant begs for Joshua's mercy. In his mind, he continues trying to understand what the boy did when he hit him, but he believes that he has wrapped his fist with mana, which makes him at least rank A, and the servant deduces that the boy is part of a family unknown to the world. Then Joshua explains to the servant that a knight must take responsibility for drawing his sword. Furthermore, he states that he is not so generous as to grant mercy to his enemies. I hear him speak so seriously, the servant feels that Joshua actually wants to put an end to that story right there, so he asks for mercy again, but on his knees this time, and says he offers his arm, so after all it was he who failed to protect his said master. So he asks the boy to at least spare Shun's calm. I see the knight proposing to throw his life away, so Joshua remembers a man in his past life who also sacrificed for him, so the boy says again that he will have no mercy with his enemies. In this, he takes the Sheen family ring and tells the servant that if he wants it back he must come look for it, otherwise Joshua will sell this item on the black market. I say this, he leaves the place, and Rubrika just stays in the corner admiring how incredible the boy is, and noticing the Shun servant completely knocked down, proposes to take him to a nearby clinic. And if you want the continuation, don't forget to leave that like and leave that comment so I can bring you more more and more videos of this manhwa here for the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.